The Wild West saloons were the pinnacle rest stop for travelers, gamblers, and drinkers alike. But how gross was the average Wild West saloon? The word comes from the French salon, and it originally had the same meaning, living room, as later on saloon meant hall, especially one on a boat or a train. In 1800s America, it came to meaning public house or bar. Saloons in its establishment originated as a liquor house, as the first saloon was established at Browns Hole, Wyoming in 1822 to serve fur trappers. By 1880, the growth of saloons was in full swing. In Leavenworth, Kansas, there was about 150 saloons and 4 wholesale liquor houses. Some saloons in the Old West were a little more than casino, brothels, and illegal substance dens, as in the saloons of the Wild West. Drinking was certainly a very popular activity, but there was more to it than just alcohol. Saloons often served food, such as a simple meal or snacks, to accompany the drinks, as some saloons also hosted entertainment such as live music, dancing, gambling, and even theatrical performances. But the food and drinks weren't always sanitary, as it was rare for one to come across clean water. So drinking whiskey was pretty super common, as well as beer and other forms of alcohol distilled. But aside the yeehaw and crime and punishments, there was also a lot of weird things in the Wild West that aren't as jarring, like how your bed would be full of squirrels. And I'm not saying like alive squirrels, although maybe. Some of the dead squirrels that they would find would be helpful to stuff your bed to be a little softer when you stayed the night. Also, everyone smelled bad, really bad, considering there wasn't any forms of pipes or running water for miles, as water would be stagnant in the water towers and not a lot of filtration was made. The acidic and boracic acid smelling water would linger not just on you, but also on your clothes. If you were lucky, you might be able to bathe maybe once a week, as it took some time as well to warm up your bathtub, as heated water wasn't also available for the times. Other than these type of cleaning hygienics like bathing, when it came to oral care like brushing your teeth, people in the Old West used a variety of methods to clean their teeth. Some common practices include a toothbrush made out of animal hair or plant fibers, and brushing with a mixture of water and baking soda or salt. Chewing on twigs or rough cloths to rub their teeth were also very common methods, as health care like oral dental care often meant tooth extractions, as other aspects were pretty much a privilege of what we're having today that did not exist back then. As well as going to the outhouse was a more common thing than going to one in the saloon, as it would have probably stunk up the establishment and prevented customers from arriving. But that still didn't prevent people to do what the French did, which is to pee in a corner. So in the Old West, people would use a variety of materials for toilet paper, including leaves, corn cobs, newspapers, and even old catalog pages. Soft, commercial produced toilet paper, as we are very privileged to know today, didn't become very widely available until the late 19th century. And since they didn't have plumbing, as these outhouses were so common and gross, they stunk, as they attracted many types of wildlife to slither their way in with you. They had bugs like black widows, and if you're extra unlucky, maybe even poisonous snakes. Also, because of the trades of goods of many were tobacco, spittoons were located everywhere. In almost every saloon, if not, you'd be finding yourself slipping on someone else's spit. Due to the widespread of the chewing tobacco in the 19th century, spittoons were a common fixture in public areas, including railroad stations. Their intended purposes was collecting tobacco juice spit from a distance, so typically they were built heavy and low to the ground. So with a wide mouth or funnel top, in the United States, public health departments launched an anti-spitting campaign to stop the spread of TB, as it became more and more aggressive in smaller populated areas. Tuberculosis had forced some of these states as spitting to be illegal, as it still is, and by the mid-20th century, spittoons were finally gone from most public spaces in the United States. I don't really think right now they still have spittoons, but that's gross. Even the towels used to clean the bathroom and the bars at saloons were the same towels you'd wipe your face if you had too much beer foam. People kept spitting, and so it was so outlawed that because of the respiratory disease went rampant in the regions, if you kept spitting, you'd be charged with a $500 fine. But either way, the Wild West, from the daily politics to hygienes, times do be changing and the world keeps on spinning. With gambling as super apparent in saloons as it was also useful pastime, it was also a risk if you were a cheat, and you might also have to cheat death, because you're not supposed to do that. Some, like the weapon fight at the OK Corral, were the outcome of long simmering feuds and rivalries, but most were the result of confrontation between outlaws and law enforcement. Although in movies, televisions would like to us believe otherwise, it was very rare when pew-pew fights occurred with the two standing fighters off squarely facing one another from a distance in a dusty street. They would just knock your butt out. The romanticized image of the Old West style fight was born in the dime novels of the late 19th century and perpetuated in film era to make such a point that this fiction version of what our mind's eye quickly conjures up when we hear the word weapon fight. You know what I mean. In actuality, the real fights of the Old West were actually so rarely civilized that yes, we might have heard some of these famed robber criminals like sharpshooters like Billy the Kid, Calamity Jane, Jesse James, and Annie Oakley. They wouldn't really wait, you know, unlike Clint Eastwood films. It was probably more rotted than it was organized, and the Wild West saloons were also known for its culture of its violence. Weapon slingers and outlaws, as I mentioned, often frequent these establishments, and disputes were often settled with a handheld weapon fight. Even saloon owners would also provide their own weapons for their patrons, and saloons itself would become a battleground during an open firefight. Saloons would also appear in every town and were your average pit stop on a long journey, and if you're a man who hasn't seen or felt the touch of a woman in a very long time and you can afford it, you might stop by to a certain saloon for a drink and quench whatever thirsty self you might be craving. Like a gentleman's club, most Wild West saloons catered almost exclusively to the white men in the frontier, although women could sometimes find work in the bars as dance hall girls or workers of the evening. But of course you have the madam of the house making sure the security of her girls are okay, but when it comes to money and gold rushes, it was pretty much more valuable than the average person's life. Respectable women didn't frequent Wild West saloons, but women who were less concerned about their reputations might find work there. Many saloon girls were widows and had no other means of support, or young girls who were seeking something more than working on their family farm. They wanted adventure, if you know what I mean. The girls were to dance with the men and get the men to buy them drinks, earning as much as $10 per week, which is pretty a lot for back then. Most saloon girls also made commissions from the drinks they sold, and whiskey sold to the customers were generally marked up to 30 to 60% over its wholesale price. But like all dames who worked in these type of eras, were definitely in her bag, as her status would be noted and gossiped throughout town. One famous saloon girl was also named Fanny Porter. Fanny's family arrived in Texas when she was just 1 year old, immigrating from England. Growing up as both an immigrant and the middle of the Wild West may have inspired her to enter the sporting life, as she took up the trade as a teenager and opened up her own brothel at the age of 20 in San Antonio. In some ways though, these saloons would have been another term for these women of the night to rebrand themselves as cantina girls. However, despite themselves and the services they provide, their life expectancies were actually short. In a typical night, and I'm not just talking about in case, someone does something to them, it was because of the drinking. A woman may have to have consumed up to 30 beers a night. An average lifespan of a woman in the cantina trade was less than a decade. Like as in current times in Japan, they also have these host clubs that if you go and meet these very handsome and beautiful people, you would also be forced to drink with them. And like the cantina girls back in the Wild West, a lot of these people would suffer a lot of liver issues, which means cantina girls still exist today, just not where we are well known of. And since I mentioned it was so dirty, they'd even bring their horses in the saloon. Like the idea of the Wild West and anyone could do anything they want. That also included bringing your horse inside of the bar to take a selfie with. Like in this photo, where the men of the saloon located in Utah took their horse to be part of the group chat profile pic, and I think my favorite part of this photo is how the bartender is also posing. But despite how gross it was back then, even part of the historical tourist attractions, there are some saloons still open and even in operation today. Saloons like the White Elephant in Fort Worth, Texas, was one of the more than 60 Wild West saloons in the city, and at the end of the 19th century, it is actually still open today for functioning, albeit in a different building. But it still holds a lot of significance, as it holds a lot of memento, part of American Western history. And speaking of history, that's all for today, folks. Thank you for joining me, and be sure to like and subscribe. My name is Jason. I wish you all the best. I don't know where this accent keeps coming from. Bye! If I just start speaking in a southern accent, I feel like my friends from Alabama would get very mad at me. They'd be like, please stop.